When I met Tim a few months ago and he asked, well, firstly about this idea of having this crazy night called His Story, and Tim approached me and said, would you be willing to speak on something? I went, well, sure. So Tim checked in with me last week and said, mate, I need to know your story arc. I need to know where this is going. So I gave him a quick rundown of what I was going to talk about, and then I've completely changed my mind, but no, just kidding, Tim. So I started my personal development journey about 1991, dragged kicking and screaming into a situation where I found myself having what's known as suicidal ideation. Lost my house, lost my relationship, lost my life savings in what Paul Keating, thanks John, what Paul Keating called the recession Australia had to have in 1991. And as a result of that, I was sort of dragged into experiential psychotherapy, bit of psychology and a whole lot of other stuff that really started to show me that I wasn't who I thought I was. And I had a bit of a coach and mentor during that time, and at one stage I am making a cup of tea, just quite an innocuous little thing in a campsite, and my coach and mentor looked at me and he said, and he's quite empathic, this guy, he said, you don't trust me. He said, in fact, you don't trust anyone. And that was a bit of a out of left field sort of comment, but when I sort of look back at my childhood, being brought out from the UK at the age of 10, speaking Yorkshire, wearing glasses, being called Four Eyes, experiencing racism, go back you pommy bastard, you know, all that sort of stuff in school. I learned to lose my accent really quickly. I learned to run because I couldn't fight. And I decided that the best way to fit in was to fit in. But within 15 months of finishing my primary school, where I shouldn't actually have repeated a year because I was younger from the UK, I'd finished my primary schooling, I'd been plucked out of that primary school just as I'd made my own cohort of friends after coming to a completely different country. And then I was sent off to what was then called a selective high school. But I didn't know that. I thought I'd done something really wrong and was being sent to another institution somewhere because I'd been a bad boy. So when I looked back at my life, I realised that trust was a serious issue for me. And then out of the blue during this conversation, I had a memory. Like it hit me like a lightning bolt. I'm 4.5 years of age. I'm in a car park where my parents used to live. I was an only child, so I was kicking a soccer ball against the wall, minding my own business as I did in those days. And downstairs in this underground car park in this apartment building, there were cages. If you parked across the road in Woolies, you would have seen something similar tonight. And these cages were just like, you know, storage areas for the apartments up top. Well, my dad and mum had so much stuff that Dad worked out that their stuff wasn't going to fit in that storage unit. And he'd gone round with a key, his key, and found that it actually fitted the main storage unit, which was like for the body corporate. So my smart dad's gone, great, I can put all my stuff in there as well. So here am I, the age of 4.5, kicking a soccer ball against the wall, minding my own business, and the man from the body corporate, this is probably about 1961, comes down and finally opens up the locker, and inside this locker is all this stuff. I'm minding my own business, and this bloke goes, hey, by gum, who owns all this shit? I was told by my dad to always tell the truth and there would be no consequences. So I said, hey, it belongs to my dad. So this bloke goes upstairs, knocks on the door, gives my dad an absolute bollocking, tell him he's got to get the stuff out, otherwise we're going to get evicted. And of course I copped the follow-on effect of that, of the bollocking as well. And I realised in that moment, if I can't trust the very person who's, you know, my hero, my own dad, who tells me to always tell the truth and there'll be no consequences, and I've copped this massive bollocking, the story I told myself, his story in that time, was, well, who can I really trust? Fast forward to then have the realisation that I didn't actually trust anyone. This is mid-90s. And then fast forward again to about 2015, 2016. So Tim's already mentioned a book that I wrote back in 2014. When it was published, I was approached by a few people, and in about 2016, 17, a woman decided to, on a podcast, to invite me on as a guest. And she said to me, why did you write the book? And I said, well, originally it was just to tell a bit of a story about how my transformation as a human being, particularly as a man, and then hanging out with good men, how important that's been for me and how it's really changed my life, because now I do have friends. And she said, so, okay, you've done all this work on yourself, you've done all this stuff with men, blah, 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 but what's it actually done for you? And it was a really curly question, and one that I'd never, ever considered. And I had one of those moments, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, it was almost like an out-of-body experience, where I'm in my head thinking about how the hell am I going to answer this really complex question. No one's ever asked me that question before. And while Elvis has left the building, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to answer this question with a smart answer, out of the blue, I heard myself reflexively say, I finally learned to trust myself. And it rocked me to my core, because I realised that my trust issues weren't with people. That's what I thought it was. But I also realised in that moment that, there's a phrase, as within, so without. If we're highly judgmental of people outside and we can criticise and view people through a particular lens, there's a damn good chance that we're inner critical. And so as we are internally is also as we are externally. What we see externally is a mirror of who we are internally. So in that moment I realised that my trust issues weren't anything to do with anyone else at all. I'd simply learned in that moment at 4.5 years of age not to trust myself because I'd made the mistake. And that's how I'd cemented that in my belief system that then carried its way all the way through my life. And as Gareth said, it's not until you start to do the unpack that you start to look at the stories you're telling yourself in your head. I was telling myself in my head that I started to realise that some of these thoughts weren't perhaps that functional. So what it meant for me from that moment on is that when someone like Tim gives me a call and says, hey mate, would you consider doing this? The question I have to ask myself is, do I trust myself? Do I trust myself to step forward, lean in a bit, know that I'm going to be nervous, know that I may cock up, know that I may bore people, know that I may not come off the stage here and think that, oh, you've done a really great job. My inner critic is still active, the imposter syndrome is still present, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. But what it's done for me is it's given me an opportunity to go, well, how far am I prepared to push myself to grow my edges? How much do I trust myself? And so when I think about that in the context of tonight and storytelling and in particularly generational stuff, sadly I never got really to understand how much my father did or didn't trust himself. But I do know through his life he played it safe. And in my failure in the 1991 recession Australia had to have, I realised looking back during my therapy years that what I'd actually done is I'd allowed my father to live through me because he didn't trust himself to do the journey that he could have done had he had a go. So generationally, I believe that the best gift we can give our children is the one that they never receive. And that is, we do our own work, we heal our own wounds, and we stop the generational trauma from being passed on. And our kids will never know. They'll just be set free. Thank you.